conference is taking place next week at Gallagher Estate, and there are 12 discussion documents that are out there for discussion, comment, and we've got two key people to talk to us today about the policy conference and also some of those discussion documents. We've got the head of policy at the ANC, Jeff Radebe, and the ANC Secretary General, Radebe and Mantashe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the program, and welcome to both of you. Perhaps I can start with you, Mr. Radebe. You talked about the second transition, strategy and tactics, and it seems to be the biggest point upon which most of this is going to drop. What has informed at this point, 18 years down the line, that we need, because we've heard words like watershed moment, paradigm shift. Why are we at this point? What have you observed? What has informed this second transition?
I think 2012 is a very important year for the ANC. We're celebrating 100 years of selfless struggle for freedom. Largely that freedom we've attained in 1994, which we describe as political freedom. As the president of the ANC, President Zuma, last year in the January 8 statement indicated that political democracy without economic emancipation is meaningless. So as we are moving towards celebrating 2 decades of our democracy, we need to look back and see whether these freedoms have in fact impacted in creating a better life for our people. So the second transition speaks to the quest of our people for radical social and economic transformation. The Secretary General has highlighted that if you look at the JSE today in the mining sector, hardly 5% of the companies are owned by blacks. So that should be a cause for concern. The SG has also highlighted the issue of land, which is a historic injustice which Solomon Plaquet, the first SG of the ANC, indicated in 1913 that one Friday morning, a native woke up not only landless, but a pariah in a land of his birth. So we cannot, as a ruling party, sit back and not do something in order to ensure that our political democracy encapsulate the economic emancipation of all. That's what it is about. It's about amplification, acceleration of the process of social and economic transformation of our society, so that we bring nearer the day that we can probably proclaim that we have a better life for our people. Right, so there's no magic, but it's just a realization that as an ANC we need to speed up this social and economic transformation.
So when we talk about paradigm shift, watershed moment, are we going to see significant shift in policy? I mean, when we wake up at the end of next week, will we think, my goodness, you know, there's been a change in the landscape of ANC policy, or are we tweaking?
No, I think we're going to see a real change. If you look at the economic transformation document, in particular, the SIMS report indicates very significantly a major change in the mineral sector of South Africa, which highlights the point that our natural endowments must be to the benefit of the majority of South African people. Now that the mineral rights are now vested in the state, we have the power to ensure that the change comes about.
So that's renewal of policy. What about the ANC as an organization, Mr. Mantashe? Are we going to see, I don't know, significant change in the way the organization is after next week?
We, towards the end of the document on organizational renewal, we're looking into the structures of the ANC. Whether it is a branch or a region, but what we're emphasizing is that you can't talk to the structure about the structures in a vacuum. Why should structures change? You must have structures that are responsive to the challenges facing society today. It doesn't have to have a branch that is ward-based. If in a rural area, that ward is 6 villages that are having a radius of 170 kilometers, it can't be responsive. We must actually structure our organization. It is responsive, because a liberation movement like the ANC must always aspire to remain a true representative of the aspiration and interest of the vast majority in society. And an organization like the ANC must always be able to drive scientific development of society. And if we are going to do that, it must always be rooted among the people and be responsive to their issues. If we are not changing the step change that point us to the renewal of an organization to be more responsive, as I said, change the mindset from an organization that is mobilized against to be an organization that is mobilized to enhance change and transformation in society. That is what we are going to do in terms of organizational renewal, and we must come out of that conference next week with a clear point as that we need to change the organization, look different, be responsive to challenges facing society.
You know, when we switch on the television and we see images of ANC members engaged in physical violence against each other, some of the comments that are being made, people might be wondering, is this a united organization? If it's not, it might be problematic when you're having discussions next week.
No, there are two things there. The first thing is that in our documents we're making concession that a liberation movement that becomes a governing party faces new challenges. We call them sins of incumbency or negative tendencies in the movement. Those challenges we are admitting ourselves. We're not waiting for people to tell us that the role of money in the organization, that every time you elect a leader, you try to elect a leader who will actually facilitate dispensing of patronage, facilitate access to tenders. We are admitting that it can't be the daily life of the ANC. The ANC must be an organization that facilitates growth and development of society. It must not develop their own. It must facilitate growth and development of entrepreneurs in societies. That is open for discussion. The question of violent confrontation among members is a new tendency, is foreign to the ANC, and it must be confronted.
Where does it come from?
It comes from the desire to access power instead of the desire to serve. Those are two different things. That you want to serve when you are leading in the ANC, you must have the desire to serve, not the desire to acquire power. Once you think of power because getting elected into the ANC gives you leverage into a whole range of things, then you are going to actually want to be a leader by hook or by crook. And we think it should be confronted. And that is what we're dealing with. That's why we talk of renewal, that the ANC must go back to the values of the ANC: selflessness, sacrifice, humility, honesty. And if we go back to those values, we will overcome these issues. That's why it is not a question of police arresting people. It is about politically educating people to understand that we are here to serve society, not power to ourselves.
Okay. Mr. Radebe, I'm going to pose a question to you. I'm wondering whether the issue is not so much policy, but the implementation thereof, because you've got provinces such as Limpopo, another province, Gauteng, whatever, they have different fortunes in terms of successes. Is it not more about the leadership rather than the policy? Is it not more about the implementation of policy than the policy itself? Because those policies that are in the ANC right now are working in some provinces and some departments, but failing in others. So I'm just thinking that the only thing in the equation might be the people in leadership.
Well, I think this is a fair point, that the issue of policies of the ANC in general are relatively very good, but the challenge is the effective implementation of ANC policies. It's another fair point that maybe in the various spheres of government we have not deployed top leaders even to local government to ensure the effective implementation of policies. If you look, for an example, at budgets of Johannesburg, Metro, Durban, Cape Town, it runs into billions, more than 30 billions for city of Johannesburg. And yet the people we deployed there, not that I have any issues with the comrades there, but I think the point being that as the National Executive Committee, we need to have a paradigm shift of ensuring that local government is a very important sphere of government. In the policy discussion document, Noma India is here, Mfeket was the chair of the committee. He raises very critical issues that we need to give more powers to local government, such as housing, public transport, because ordinary people in South Africa, they feel government at a local level, but we do not give the necessary political support to that important sphere of government. So the point you are making, that in terms of the implementation, sometimes there are issues. That is why these discussion documents are aimed at ensuring that we address these weaknesses that have been identified.
So shouldn't there be a discussion on how those leaders are chosen?
Well, I think it's one of the debates, even what the SG is saying on the organizational renewal document, that we need to attract members who come to serve our people, not to line their private pockets or self-aggrandizement.
Okay, all right. I think that's just by way of introduction. We've just had this very brief conversation, but it's very much about you and the viewers at home as well. So let's start at table number 1. I think there's somebody there who's got a question. If you could stand up, introduce yourself, and very briefly put the question through to our gentleman here.
My name is Diko. I'm a student at UNISA doing policy studies. My question is related to public participation in the local sphere of government, because it's at the coal face of service delivery. How is the ANC ensuring that the ward committee system is not becoming a political extension of the ANC branches, but is inclusive to all members of the communities? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the issue should be the worry about ANC members being active in ward committees. It should be about people who are active in that community being attracted to ward committees. So if we are going to sit and try to select or deselect ANC activists in ward committees, we may miss the point if they are active. The key to a ward committee is that in every part of the ward, there should be a person who is known, who is serving the people, who is responsive. And that person should not be identified in terms of political affiliation. Even today, not all ward committee members are ANC members. You have quite a number of ward committee members who are not ANC members, but who are active. And that is what ward committee should be. I can see you are shaking your head. The reality of the matter is that a majority party like the ANC impacts on society in that proportion. And therefore, many of the people who are identified with the ANC are actually not card-carrying members of the ANC, but love the ANC, support the ANC, and are active in ward committees. My argument is a ward committee should be a committee of activists in that particular ward, across the political spectrum. But if the ward committee becomes an artificial representative body and say who represent what party and so forth, then you are going to be very artificial with ward committees.
Okay, I think he's still shaking his head, but there you go.
I live it.
Table 18. Who's at table 18? If you could stand up and is it 12? Sorry, I must have confused my own writing.
Good morning. My name is Marcie Claessens. I'm from a firm called Protect a Partner. My question is, how serious is government about fighting corruption? Will enough budget be made available to fight corruption, because it does affect economic development in the country? And then how will you achieve balance as a ruling party between looking good and looking bad?
Well, I think practice speaks for itself. In Polokwane, we decided on 5 priorities, including fight against crime and corruption. The administration that is in authority at the moment has also focused on the issue of fighting corruption. The president has signed not less than 22 proclamations in terms of investigating various acts of corruption in South Africa through the Special Investigative Unit. the major arrests that are being made, including day before yesterday, of members of the police service in Durban, the so-called Ketomeno gang, is a reflection of the seriousness with which we take the issue of fighting against corruption. As we speak, sadly, the former National Commissioner was convicted through the efforts of the ANC government. So our total commitment in fighting against corruption can never be questioned. We ensure that wherever corruption rears its ugly head, we need to chop it, no matter who it is involved. So I want to assure you that we stand steadfast in fighting against corruption, and also we support other organizations that are also involved in anti-corruption activities, like the Corruption Watch that was initiated by COSATU and other non-governmental organizations.
All right, so that's enforcing the law and chasing corruption, but doesn't there need to be a shift in terms of how people think about corruption? And, you know, I think often about someone in an office who takes a pen and gives it to their child at home instead of going to buy one at the is there a role for the ANC perhaps to inculcate the idea that even the smallest act is building upon this corruption that we're seeing? Because yes, we can chase corruption, but it started somewhere. There's an attitude that needs to shift.
The question of corruption and fighting corruption is a societal matter. In communities, we in a way support corruption. I steal a radio in a car, I break into a car, I sell that radio, I buy it. When I buy it, I'm actually encouraging that act of corruption. I'm going to the basics. The ANC must be seen to be actively fighting corruption. If there's an allegation against a member, the chairperson of the discipline in Gauteng is the mayor of Ekurhuleni, is sitting here. I'm sitting in Lutuli House. I'm expecting him to come up concretely on what he's going to do, for example, with an MEC who has a whole range of allegations against him. And I'm waiting patiently to see that the ANC does take action against those allegations. If I don't get that report, they will know that we phoned them and asked what is happening to that allegation. And it happens to all the provinces. But you can't separate the ANC from the effort of the state, because those institutions in the state are institutions that are actually empowered. That's why I said, when I said we've deepened democracy, is about establishing those institutions that have the capacity and the clout to deal with corruption. But what happens in the public discussion is that when the public protector, for example, come up very strong with reports, there is a tendency to separate the public protector from the rest and be seen as something separate. That is a Chapter 9 institution that is intended to fight corruption. If the Auditor General come up with reports, people tend to ring fence the Auditor General and see that Auditor General as something different. All those institutions are supported by the ANC. That's why when the public protector was under siege and attacked, it was ministers of the ANC government that come up in defense of that public protector. That is where the complementarity is between a governing party and institution in government.
Just last point on this anti-corruption crusade, that if you read in the papers, the majority of instances of exposing corruption, they emanate from government itself. So there is a perception sometimes to create as if it's only government. It always takes two to tango. So we don't see much about the corruption that happens in the private sector, because those corrupt public officials, they are being tangled by people in the private sector. So we need to see a lot of action, a lot of talk against corruption in the private sector itself.
All right, so we're going to pick that up straight after the break, because we need to take a commercial break.